A young John Madden was now established as the head coach of the Oakland Raiders. Having come off back-to-back seasons where the team finished with a combined regular season record of 37, 4, and 1, with one Super Bowl appearance and two others nearly within their grasp, the Raiders finished the decade as three-time defending Western Division champions. No team was more respected or more feared going into the 1970 season than the team donning the silver and black. So now that a new era in professional football was beginning, with the NFL merger now complete, there was still some unfinished business for the Raiders organization. How would the team deal with a new landscape, a continuation of old rivalries, and now begin a new rivalry with a team just across the bay, now on an equal playing field? All these questions and more will be delved into in this episode of the T3 Raider Roots podcast as we look at the year 1970. Thank you for joining me today. Before the 1967 season had gotten underway, there was a critical NFL owners meeting to discuss lots of issues relating to the final merger between the AFL and the NFL, which would begin as separate conferences, the AFC and NFC, as part of a single league. Taxes would be discussed, as well as establishing territorial rules and guidelines for the 49ers and Raiders in the Bay Area, and the Giants and Jets coexisting in New York. During the meeting, Art Rooney Sr. of the Pittsburgh Steelers had stood up and said, "There's too much muscle in the other room from that young kid." The AFL owners were meeting in another room of the same hotel, and Wellington Mara of the New York Giants echoed Rooney's sentiments by saying, "No Brooklyn hoodlum is going to tell me how to run the National Football League." Of course, the kid and the Brooklyn hoodlum they were both referring to was none other than Al Davis. As part owner of the Oakland Raiders, Davis elaborated, "I had obtained voting proxies for the realignment process from Bill Sullivan of the Patriots, Ralph Wilson of the Bills, and Lamar Hunt of the Chiefs 2 years earlier in 1967 because they thought we would get hoodwinked in negotiations. They weren't tough guys in a meeting room. Even Lamar, who was supposedly doing the merger, had said, 'Let Al handle it. He'll know what to do.' Ralph and Billy said, 'That's fine with us.' From past experiences, they knew that I would be a tenacious bargainer in seeking an equitable arrangement for our teams. I had the vote of Gene Klein, by then the owner of the San Diego Chargers. Bud Adams was with me. I had enough votes to block any movement within the NFL to ignore our interests." Davis believed he was dealing from a position of strength because the New York Jets of the AFL had just knocked off the Baltimore Colts in Super Bowl III. And there was no doubt that the younger league had achieved parity, which enraged the NFL owners. Not only had the AFL representative, the Jets, defeated the heavily favored Colts, their quarterback, the brash and cocky Joe Namath, had even guaranteed a victory and then delivered. Now, Davis and the AFL were calling for an even 13-13 division of the 26 professional football teams for the two conferences. At that moment, the leagues numbered 10 and 16 in teams. The older league wanted to keep it that way, but would let the AFL teams play regular season games against them. "No way," Davis said. "That wasn't good enough for us." The man handling the legalese for the AFL was attorney Arnold Grant, an aggressive and smart lawyer representing the New York Jets. He stood before the assembled NFL owners and told them, "You made a deal 3 years ago that you were going to have realignment. Stand by your agreement, otherwise we're going to take you to court." After that, Commissioner Pete Rozelle conceded that it would be a 13-team AFC and a 13-team NFC starting play in 1970. Rozelle even told Davis, referring to the collective NFL ownership, that "we can work this out." But despite meetings all week, they could not decide among themselves which three NFL teams would move over to become a part of the new AFC. After much clashing, reneging, arguing, and impasse, Rozelle came into the AFL room and reported, "I got a press conference at midnight to announce the final alignment. We're having trouble with the 13-13. I think it's going to have to be 16-10. Davis responded firmly, "It's going to be 13-13 or we're not going to go with it." He and his colleagues were pushing for Washington, Philadelphia, and St. Louis to be the teams to cross over and join the AFC. Even though these three teams had not measured up to the level of success of other NFL franchises, each of these cities either had or were getting ready to have new stadiums. Rozelle repeated that the owners were having trouble finding teams that would agree to cross over, and he complained that the AFL contingent was going to blow his press conference by being obstinate. Too bad, Davis retorted. There's no way I'm going to give in on this. No way. About an hour later, around midnight, Davis received a knock on the door of the AFL meeting room. When he opened it, there stood Carroll Rosenblum of the Baltimore Colts. He told Davis that he was bringing 3 teams over to the new AFC. The first was his own Baltimore Colts. Rosenblum had said he wanted to switch because he was still angry about losing to the Jets in the Super Bowl the previous January, and this would give him a chance to enact revenge, playing in the same division as the Jets. Then he said, coming with me will be Cleveland and Pittsburgh. Cleveland owner Art Modell had stipulated that he wanted to be in the same division as the Steelers, and then there was the natural in-state rivalry that would set up between the Browns and the Cincinnati Bengals. So the decision was made and the realignment happened. Baltimore moved into the new AFC East, joining Buffalo, Boston, New York, and Miami. The new Central Division saw Cleveland and Pittsburgh joining with Cincinnati and Houston, while the 4-team Western Division, consisting of the Broncos, Chargers, Chiefs, and Raiders, remained intact. So by the time the 1967 season had concluded, and before the draft was even underway, the new 13 and 13 set was ready to go. The AFL had gotten in one more parting shot with the Kansas City Chiefs defeating the Minnesota Vikings in Super Bowl IV. The Raiders, just like all the other teams, had to put ill feelings behind them because Kansas City was their main rival, and the Raiders believed that Super Bowl title should have been rightfully theirs. And so it was on to 1970. In the 1970 draft, the Raiders picked up 17 players. The first 2 picks were tight ends. Ted Coy was chosen with the 50th pick after the Raiders selected Raymond Chester with the number 24 pick. To bolster the defense, the Raiders added linebacker Gerald Irons and defensive end Tony Klein, as well as defensive back Alvin Wyatt, who would pay off later in the season returning punts. Al Davis, the master scout, was adding pieces to an already solid roster, one that still had a few ageless surprises. The Raiders' regular season challenge began in Cincinnati at the Bengals' new Riverfront Stadium. Not even the wizardry of Fred Biletnikoff's 2 touchdown receptions or a 63-yard punt return by Alvin Wyatt could tame the Bengals. The Raiders suffered their first opening game day defeat since 1964, losing by 10 to Cincinnati. But even in the midst of defeat, a star was born, a rugged and determined rookie tight end from Morgan State named Raymond Chester. But despite the heroics of the Raider rookie, the day belonged to unheralded Bengal running back Jess Phillips, and Cincinnati netted a 31-21 triumph. In week 2, Oakland appeared ready to jump back into the win column. George Atkinson led the defense with 2 interceptions, and a powerful offensive play saw Pete Banaszak score 2 touchdowns, while veteran receiver Fred Biletnikoff hauled in a touchdown pass, and George Blanda registered 2 field goals. But the 27 points put up by Oakland was matched by the home team, the San Diego Chargers, and the Raiders saw their record fall to 0-1-1. Still looking for a victory in week 3, the team traveled to Miami. Running back Charlie Smith got the Raiders off to a fast start with a 60-yard touchdown run, but was washed out by a penalty, much the same way that a great deal of the game was washed away by torrential rains. 2 field goals by George Blanda and a solo touchdown by Warren Wells were not enough, as the home team proved to be less than hospitable. Miami was a team on the rise. They were to be just a little more than a year away from their very first Super Bowl appearance. On the other hand, the Raiders, the same team that had put together the 3 best consecutive seasons in pro football history, fell 20-13, and the record now stood at 0-2-1. The year seemed to be slipping away as quickly as it started. When the Raiders returned home the following week to take on the division-leading and undefeated Denver Broncos, John Madden rallied his troops, and the result was the destruction of the opposition. The offensive line of Otto, Upshaw, Shell, Jim Harvey, and Bob Svias gave the Raider runners ample room to move, and that's exactly what they did. Darryl LaMonica got the passing attack back on track, and the Raiders roared to a 35-23 victory. However, in the win, not all was rosy. Star defensive cornerback Willie Brown suffered a shoulder injury on a diving interception in the end zone. and he would be missing in action for a large chunk of the remaining portion of the season. Still at home the following week, the Raiders played its first regular season game against an NFL opponent as the Washington Redskins came to the Bay Area to play a game on Monday night before a crowd of nearly 55,000 fans, as well as a national TV audience. The vaunted Sonny Jurgensen air attack was shot down by Raiders Kent McLuhan and Nehemiah Wilson. Tom Keating and linebacker Dwayne Benson shut down the Raiders' ground game. Hewitt Dixon then carried the ball for a total of 164 yards, demolishing the defense of the Burgundy and Gold. This set up the bomb to Warren Wells that exploded the Redskins secondary and convinced onlookers that Oakland was back in the fight to be number one. With a 34-20 victory, the Raiders had now notched 2 victories in a row, evening their record at 2-2-1. Following their victory over the Redskins, Oakland took on the Pittsburgh Steelers for the very first time. Coached by Al Davis's former colleague Chuck Noll, a man who had almost become the Raiders head coach instead of John Madden the year before, there are several things worthy of mention in their first meeting. First, the Steelers appeared in all white, both jerseys and pants, along with black helmets. Their uniforms, in fact, were very similar to the original Oakland Raiders uniforms prior to Al Davis's arrival in 1963. Leading the charge for the Steelers was first-round draft pick and number 1 overall selection Terry Bradshaw. Before becoming a thorn in the side of the Raiders on an almost annual basis, the Louisiana Laser was nearly a Raider himself. After drafting Bradshaw with the first pick in the 1970 draft, the Steelers had wanted to trade him to Oakland for running back Marv Hubbard and a first-round draft choice. But Lou Spadia, the general manager of the Cross Bay rival San Francisco 49ers, the same man who had tried to get the Raiders uprooted and moved north to Seattle, stopped the move. He didn't want his East Bay rivals to get such a premier quarterback prospect. Spadia and a Pittsburgh front office executive named Ed Keeley were buddies in the Navy during World War II, and Spadia talked Keeley out of letting the Steelers do business with the Raiders, all according to Al Davis. Regardless, the young Bradshaw was rudely welcomed in Oakland by a tough Raider defense who introduced him to the Alameda turf on numerous occasions. The elusive young quarterback was able to avoid the rush on one play and launched a long touchdown pass to back John Fuqua, but even that was called back by penalty. But Bradshaw continued to pass the ball and move the Steelers to a score, which cut the Raider lead to 10. But another touchdown scoring toss to tight end Raymond Chester sealed the deal, and Oakland cruised to a 31-14 victory. The spectacular rookie tight end for the Raiders put on a show and was on the receiving end of 3 touchdown passes that day, 2 by LaMonica and 1 by George Blanda, who's 21 years older than Chester. 3 victories in a row, and it was now on to Kansas City, where the defending world champion Chiefs were waiting. In a tough battle, the LaMonica to Chester connection helped Oakland to an early lead, but Kansas City, led by Len Dawson, battled back and overcame a furious defensive effort by the Raider defense to lead the game late, 17-14. All they had to do was pick up one more first down late, and the game would be over. Quarterback Len Dawson called his own number and rolled out to his right, picking up the first down and seeming to end the game. But after he was down, he was speared in the back by Ben Davidson, resulting in a penalty. But then coming out of nowhere was Dawson's receiver, Otis Taylor, who jumped on Davidson, resulting in another penalty. A benches-clearing brawl broke out, and when the dust settled, instead of securing the win, the play was nullified, and the Raiders' defense stopped the Chiefs. With little time left, LaMonica quickly marched the Raiders into position for a game-tying field goal of 48 yards by the ageless wonder George Blanda, who delivered. It was the beginning of a magical run by Blanda, who Davis had referred to during the previous summer training camp as a sour old guy, and had briefly placed him on waivers. Now, with his dramatic last-second heroics against Kansas City, radio announcer Bill King stated that George Blanda has just been elected king of the world. Blanda would continue with his improbable run for 3 more consecutive weeks. Back home against Cleveland, the old man came off the bench for the injured Darryl LaMonica and passed the Raiders to a touchdown and a 52-yard game-winning field goal with just 7 seconds left in the contest to help eke out a 23-20 come-from-behind win. The next chapter in this story occurred the following week in Denver. When the Broncos had rallied to a 19-17 lead in the contest, the home fans were already starting to celebrate. But Blanda came into the game and brought the Raiders off the mat with a scoring pass to Biletnikoff and the Raiders won 24-19. The Raiders came back home against San Diego, having not lost in their last 6 games. But the Chargers and the Silver and Black engaged in a back-and-forth contest that resulted in a tie score at 17 late in the game. Almost as if on cue, Blanda emerged from the shadows and kicked a field goal with just 7 seconds left to give the Raiders another win at the end, 20-17. Their record now stood at 6-2-2. Oakland radio station KNEW promoted its broadcasts of the games by mixing highlights of Bill King's play-by-play calls with America the Beautiful and the Hallelujah Chorus, along with narration that served as a parody for an old-time radio serial. George has done everything. What does he do for an encore? Find out this weekend. The habitual last-minute success of the grizzled old veteran, combined with his tough, irascible nature, made him an easy idol among the Raider faithful, and they played it to the hilt. Blanda's memorable string of talent and good luck led him to be selected at the end of the year as the NFL Player of the Year. But right now, the only thing occupying the minds of many of the Raiders was winning the division again, advancing to the conference championship, and moving on to the Super Bowl, where they could win and finally silence all the critics. 4 days after defeating the Chargers, luck would run out in Detroit against the Lions on Thanksgiving Day. The luck started out good enough as the Lions fumbled away the opening kickoff. A LaMonica to Blitnikoff touchdown pass put the Raiders up early 7-0. Later in the quarter, on an almost identical play, the tandem combined again on a 21-yard scoring pass play. Lions quarterback Greg Landry, now playing catch-up, led Detroit down the field before hooking up with his tight end, Charlie Sanders, on a spectacular diving catch in the end zone to put points on the board for the home team. After that, it was all Lions as they cruised to a 28-14 victory as Charlie Sanders made one more spectacular diving end zone catch. The Lions put an end to the Raiders' string of good fortune. Things didn't look much better the following week in New York. Despite a Blanda to Wells touchdown toss late in the third quarter that cut the lead to 10-7, the Jets, the New Yorkers intercepted LaMonica for the second time and added another field goal, and they pushed their lead to 13-7. Then, a now healthy Willie Brown bailed out the visitors by intercepting a ball late. With only 8 seconds left and a chance to win, if anyone thought the Raiders could do it, certainly the Jets should have. But the miracle that happened during the game wasn't a little girl named Heidi. It came courtesy of a long pass, batted into the air in the end zone, and then grabbed by Warren Wells off the deflection. Blanda added the extra point, and the Raiders won the game 14-13, a game they certainly should have lost by all accounts. The final regular season game saw the Raiders playing host to longtime rival Kansas City. An early Chiefs interception resulted in 3 points and an early lead for the visitors. In the first half, battering defenses kept the point totals low. Despite a key completion to Blitnikoff, LaMonica could not push the Raiders into the end zone and had to settle for 2 George Blanda field goals. The Raiders led at halftime 6-3. In the second half, behind the powerful running of Marv Hubbard, the Raiders finally got into the end zone and were up 13-6. On this day, there would be no last-second heroics. There would be no nail-biting drama. The Raiders made no mistakes. Like a silver and black wave, the Raiders rolled over the Chiefs 20-6 and achieved their record-breaking 4th straight Western Division title. With both teams having clinched their respective division titles and a playoff berth in both the AFC and NFC, Oakland and San Francisco squared off in the Battle of the Bays in the last game of the season. A Raymond Chester touchdown catch resulted in an early lead for the home team, but a barrage of turnovers allowed the 49ers to roar to a large lead, and they never looked back, winning the game 38-7. The Raiders had to regroup at home for a divisional playoff against the up-and-coming Miami Dolphins. Before the kickoff, the Sun and the 18th straight sellout crowd filled the Oakland Coliseum. But the field had not dried out from the hard rains, and it was a sloppy mess. After George Blanda clanged an attempted field goal off the right upright, the Dolphins scored first. In these conditions, 7 points might have been enough to win the game. But a determined Raider defense turned up the heat on Bob Greasy, then cooled him off by planting him in the mud time after time. An 82-yard pass play to clutch fill-in receiver Rod Sherman and an interception return for touchdown by Willie Brown led the Oakland Raiders to a 21-14 victory and a trip to Baltimore for the first ever AFC Championship game. In Baltimore, the Colts and Raiders met for the very first time, and each team had something to prove. In a defensive stalemate on the dirt of Memorial Stadium, both quarterbacks missed big plays by mere inches. Baltimore quarterback John Unitas was more effective in moving his team, and he got the Colts down close to the goal line before the Raider defense stood its ground and forced the Colts to settle for a field goal by rookie Jim O'Brien. At the end of the first quarter, the score was Baltimore 3, Oakland nothing. In the second quarter, the Oakland ground game began to come to life. LaMonica charged his team down the field, mainly behind the rushing of Hewitt Dixon. Then, right after LaMonica had just missed Biletnikoff on a long pass, hard-charging Bubba Smith of the Colts drilled the Raider quarterback, knocking him out of the game. Upon getting the ball back, Unitas continued to pepper the Oakland secondary with long passes. One just narrowly missed being a touchdown. Another was nearly intercepted by Willie Brown, and the Colts had to punt. A booming kick by punter David Lee was mishandled by the Raiders' George Atkinson, resulting in the only fumble of the game, but it was a costly one. Unitas connected with Eddie Hinton, who took it down to the 2-yard line where Norm Bulash powered over the left side of the line to give the Colts a 10-0 lead. Oakland's miracle man, George Blanda, then came into the game, but not even the man who led the Raiders to so many thrilling victories during the year could do much. The stingy Colt defense forced a punt, but a roughing the kicker penalty gave the Raiders one more chance during the first half, and old George finally connected on a 48-yard field goal before halftime, cutting the Colt lead to 10-3. The pass defense for the Colts held up so well that by the end of the half, none of the Raiders' receivers, Wells, Chester, Biletnikoff, registered a single reception, and Oakland had only 9 net passing yards when the two teams went to the locker rooms. Going to the second half, George Blanda made it a priority to involve all 3 of his receivers in the passing game. He did so, with all 3 contributing, culminating in a Blanda to Biletnikoff touchdown strike, which tied the game at 10. Unitas again drove the Colts down the field. 2 key receptions by Eddie Hinton moved the ball to within scoring territory, but an almost certain touchdown pass went right through the hands of wideout Roy Jefferson, and Unitas and the Colts had to settle for 3 points off the foot of rookie O'Brien, breaking the tie. The Colt defense then did its job, effectively shutting down the Raiders and forcing another punt. This time, Unitas drove the ball down the field, and rookie Norm Bulash found the end zone for his second touchdown of the day, pushing Baltimore to a 20-10 lead at the end of quarter number 3. With at least one more miracle left in him, Blanda then drove the Raiders down the field with a combination of runs and passes and hit Warren Wells with a touchdown that brought the Raiders back to within 3, with plenty of time still left in the contest. The Raiders' defense played tough, and Baltimore found itself faced with a 3rd and long on its own 32. Then, Unitas hit receiver Ray Perkins on a 68-yard pass play, which the receiver gathered in over his shoulder, and number 27 took it all the way, giving Baltimore a point total of 27 and a 10-point lead once again. And that's where it ended. Baltimore would go on to Miami in the Super Bowl. For the Raiders, what kind of season was it? After 11 years, the Oakland Raiders had risen to a level of success and consistency that was unmatched by any team in professional sports. In 1970, the Oakland Raiders thrilled football fans everywhere with one dramatic victory over another. In the words of legendary Raider announcer Bill King, if a television script writer or a hack pulp fiction writer tried to write the kind of finishes that the Raiders have produced this year, they would send him to the loony bin before he even got past the first proofreader. For this episode, I would like to thank Mike Ciani and Christine Setting Clark, co-authors of the book Cheating is Encouraged. I'd also like to thank Murray Olderman, Mark Grabowski, Ken Rappaport, Michael McCambridge, Glenn Dickey, Jim Otto, and NFL Films. Make sure to visit my YouTube channel, T3 Sports Guy, and subscribe so you can catch up on all the Raiders history year by year. You can also catch me on the One Only Nation podcast as we continue to follow the silver and black. Our next stop on this Raiders journey will be the year 1971. Until then, thank you so much for joining me, and I want to remind you that passion always outlives fashion. Here's wishing you a bright silver moon shining in the dark black night. Stay safe and take care, and go Raiders.